Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this morning's webinar. Before we begin, we'll just pause for a few moments while everyone starts to connect. ARACY hosts webinars to share information and promote discussion across a range of topics. We welcome the opportunity to highlight the research of others and centre the voices of those with lived experience. Through these webinars, we seek to grow capability and knowledge across the sector. I'd now like to introduce ARACY CEO, Penny Dakin.
Open today's webinar by acknowledging that we live and that we work on lands whose sovereignty have never been ceded. We want to acknowledge the deep and ongoing connections that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have to country and to community across Australia. On behalf of all today's panellists, I want to pay our respects to elders past, present, and to acknowledge the leaders who are currently emerging in community. ARACY specifically supports the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We seek to see all our children thrive. Children are central to that statement, and through meaningful dialogue, we can achieve change that builds all children a better future, and we remain committed to seeing this change happen. Responsive relationships built through dialogue and positive interactions are crucial to developing healthy brains and healthy lives. We acknowledge a history of displacement can have intergenerational effects, contributing to adverse experiences for children and families. And we acknowledge our role in supporting and modelling respectful dialogue to the community will promote constructive engagement and to deliver, we hope, improved outcomes for all Australian children and families. So on that note, I think it's really important to acknowledge what brings us here today, and it is this firm partnership and ongoing dialogue that ARACY shares with UNICEF Australia. And I'm delighted to have colleagues from UNICEF Australia with me today, most notably Nicole Breeze. It's always a joy when Nicole and I can hop online and share information with our audiences, and when we can chat about not only the partnership between ARACY and UNICEF Australia, but the work that we are doing and will continue to do together to highlight the wellbeing of Australia's children and young people. It was with great joy that ARACY and UNICEF launched back in 2022 the Australian Children's Wellbeing Index as a powerful way of being able to understand how Australian children and families were doing now, but also as a mechanism for us to be able to track those changes over time and to hopefully see lots of positive improvements in the data for children. I'm looking forward to chatting shortly with you, Nicole, about what we're seeing in that report and why you think that this report is such an important thing for ARACY and UNICEF Australia to be doing together. But I might just do us a little bit of background about the report and how we got there before we kick into the conversation. So like many things that ARACY is involved in, the report itself and the index is built around the NEST Wellbeing Framework. And I'm sure many of the people online today are familiar with that framework, but because it is such an essential part of the work that we've been doing and the work that we're here to discuss today, I'm going to talk through those 6 interconnected domains of wellbeing just briefly so that we can ground ourselves in the fact that whilst we're talking about health today, health is just one of those 6 domains. So as I'm sure you're familiar with, the NEST is 6 interconnected domains of wellbeing. The first being that children need to be valued, loved and safe. And that's around the connections and nurturing and how we look after our children and the connections that they have. But more importantly, or emergingly importantly, probably not more importantly, is that it's also about being safe, being kept safe from immediate and long-term harm. And increasingly, one of the things that we're seeing is that long-term harm is being seen as climate change and concerns about our ability to be able to take care of the environment. Another domain is material basics, and that is having sufficient material basics, housing, access to clothing, access to data, access to food, access to the opportunities that material basics present. And we want to see all Australian children have enough material basics to thrive. Healthy, obviously, is what the subject matter of our conversation today. Learning, through connections, through school, learning through community, and of course acknowledging that parents are our children's first teachers from the very earliest years of life. participating, having a voice, being able to have a say about the issues that matter to young people, to children. And we're going to have a couple of young advocates join us later in today's webinar who are going to actually bring life to actually what it means to genuinely be able to participate and have a voice and input. And then finally, the last domain of wellbeing is having a positive sense of identity and culture. And that positive sense of identity and culture is core to wellbeing. And when we talk about identity and culture, that is all of the elements that make up who you are as a child or a young person. And culture is for both our First Nations and multicultural participants, but culture is something that we all share. We all have our own experience of culture. To create positive change in Australia's children and young people, we need to understand what we're doing well and what we're not doing so well on, and where we need to pay more attention in the future. The report that we're looking at today ultimately aims to set policy and policy priorities and guide actions to ensure that we're making the right decisions to ensure that Australians have an equitable future and an equitable place to grow up. It's important that as we do this, that we keep that holistic approach to wellbeing and to better understand the intersections between those domains of wellbeing. The index pulls together a lot of information and a lot of data, and we need to look at that as an overview, but more importantly, we need to then deep dive into those individual domains of wellbeing. And of course, that's what we're here to talk about today, making Australia the best place to grow up, a deeper look at the healthy side of the index. So as an inroad into that, I'd like to have a brief conversation with you, if I could, Nicole, about what your vision for the index was and remains, and why you think it's so important that we deep dive into the individual domains, that starting with healthy.
Yeah, hi Penny. It's great to join you today, and thanks to everybody who's connected in for this important conversation. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm joining the webinar today from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to, on behalf of UNICEF Australia, also state again just our commitment to the upholding of the Uluru Statement from the Heart in its fullness, voice, truth and treaty. Yeah, Penny, I'm really excited that here we are today, and we're launching the first of our series of occasional papers, as you've well described, which is a deep dive into one critical aspect of children's rights and children's wellbeing. The index, I think, is so important for us, and we've had a challenge in Australia around data. And many on the webinar will remember Australia's first National Children's Commissioner, Megan Mitchell. Every year when she reported to Parliament, she'd highlight as the first challenge the lack of available high quality data to help us track and understand the progress, where we're doing well and where we're lagging around all aspects of realising children's rights in Australia. And so this is a challenge that we really need to invest in overcoming. So as you've described, Penny, this is why our two organisations have come together to build out what is Australia's first National Children's Wellbeing Index. As you've said, it's a framework to help us show what life is like for Australian children and young people. It helps us to track progress across all aspects of children's rights and children's wellbeing, and it enables us to influence decision makers and help to drive investments in policies and programs in ways in which we can target them based on data-informed decisions. It's such a critical piece of work. We need to continue to ensure that good quality accessible data is flowing into initiatives and projects like this.
Thanks, Nicole. I can't tell you how much joy it does give me to do this work, and to particularly highlight today the deep dive into health and the health domain, and particularly, as the title of today's webinar suggests, a deeper look at young people's mental health, because we know and we can see from the data that is actually in the index and the work that people will see when they read the report that we're launching today, that is a challenge that we have now. It's a challenge that it's not something that wasn't in the past, but something we're much more familiar with today. And it's something that, given all of the other circumstances we find ourselves in the complex and changing environment that has become Australia in the modern world, that it's something we're going to be very conscious of going forward. I think it's really important that as we do that, I'd really like to ground that discussion in a couple of definitions, because I think when we talk health, often we think largely about the physical health of children and young people. We think about the things that the report covers, and they're very, very important: immunisation, the things that cause us to get sick and to have poor physical health. But I think it's really important for us to ground that conversation in definitions. So the World Health Organization defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. So this is about more than just the absence of disease and infirmity. And I think the conversation I'm sure that our colleagues are going to have shortly about the lived experience of mental health and mental health challenges and what's working to improve mental health outcomes for children and young people will very much use. Also wanted to take in plus, we've both, Nicole and I, started our statements today with a grounding in the political nowness of our country around the Uluru Statement of the Heart and the need for us to drive towards a more equitable Australia. So I think if we think about how the National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation has defined health for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, we can see again that important linking between the physical, the mental and the social. Aboriginal health does not mean the physical well-being of an individual, but refers to the social, emotional and cultural well-being of the whole community, in which each individual is able to achieve their full potential. And I think both of those definitions actually allude to what we're trying to create here through the work of the index and through the deep dive, that understanding that our health is completely interconnected to many, many other aspects of our well-being, all other aspects of our well-being, our material basics, our ability to participate, our ability to have a voice, our connections to community and culture, and also our climate. And so, Nicole, I think one of the things that I'm really keen to understand from you, and I know that UNICEF is very heavily involved in a lot of work related to climate and to climate change, why do you see that as something that is not just an environmental issue, but a health issue that's shaping the work that you guys are doing?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, Penny. And what I'd say kind of about what this healthy paper tells us overall is that we've got a real mixed picture in Australia in terms of outcomes for children. The data shows us that on the most part, for many children and young people, Australia is a great place, and they've got access to everything they need to live a healthy lifestyle. However, what it shows us that is inequality is persistent and it's worsening, and you're seeing poorer outcomes for certain groups of the population, and we're just not shifting the dial there. Your question about climate change, Penny, I think we've got it listed in the report as an emerging threat to children's health, but based on the work we're doing at the community level, I think we need to stop talking about climate change as an emerging threat to children's health, and we need to recognise the immediate impacts it's having here and now. You're spot on, Penny. It's really important that when we're thinking about climate change, we're connecting children's health and development to its impacts and really taking that in as our entry point. We know that climate change is driving extreme weather events, for example, and that those extreme weather events are occurring with greater frequency and greater intensity. We've worked together with our partner organisation, Royal Far West, in communities affected by multiple emergency and natural disaster events. And what we're seeing is that here and now in Australia, these events are derailing children's health and children's development. So we're seeing impacts immediately around children's physical health, through things like exposure to mould, exposure to bushfire smoke. We're seeing really frightening rates of growing anxiety and other mental health concerns, which build in children and young people. And the research tells us that these mental health impacts actually take a number of years to really manifest for children. And across the other domains, Penny, not only health, we're seeing disconnection to children's ability to participate in their education and learning. We're seeing disruptions to recreation and play. So climate change is here. Its impacts are very profound when it comes to children and young people. However, children and young people seem to be a forgotten group when it comes to looking at what we need to do to respond. Typically, we think if we build solutions for adults, they're going to work for children, but everybody in this conversation who works in this space knows we need unique solutions. So thanks for that question, Penny.
No, I couldn't agree with you anymore, Nicole. I think that old adage that if it works for the adults, it works for the kids is something that we really have to turn around, and I hope is one of the outcomes of both the work we're doing for the index, but the deep dive papers as well, that allows us to change that perception. I think as we read through the report that we're launching today, you know, I think you're right. There are some things that are really good, and I think we should, you know, take a moment to call out some of those things. And as a country, by and large, most Australians do experience really high quality and good health. We've done fabulous work around asthma. There's been changes to the way smoking and the use of traditional cigarettes have changed and have dropped over time. I think it's great that we can see in the report that, you know, a large number of older children and young people are finding that they have access to the information that they need to be able to manage their own health, to make informed decisions, and to be able to look after themselves. I think all of those things that are good need to be called out, and we need to congratulate the people in our governments and state and territory and Commonwealth levels who've been doing this work over many years to reduce asthma, to reduce smoking rates, to do the hard work to get us to those things. And as you say, we've been able to succeed. And if climate change is, well, it's not climate emergent, if it is the threat of the moment, we now need to see the same intensity put towards those efforts that we saw around reducing smoking rates, for instance, over the 30 years that have gone before. And if we do that, maybe we'll be able to see the same sort of benefits. I think it's also, though, important to acknowledge that, you know, in some areas in this report, and the one that I'm, you know, particularly interested in, where we're not doing so well, is tooth decay. Like, this is something that, you know, I've read it in the report a few times as we've been preparing it, and it never ceases to shock me that this is something that in modern Australia that we're still falling behind on. And then, of course, and I'm very keen to hear your thoughts about this one, Nicole, the growing and concerning inequities that we have between health outcomes across the board for First Nations Australians. And you know, we ground the work that we do at ARACY with that acknowledgement of country and with that acknowledgement that we've got more work to do for First Nations Australians. But if you look at the data that's in today's report around those inequities, what do you see as the challenges that we need to be stepping into in the next little while, Nicole, to sort of think about those health challenges and particularly the inequities for First Nations Australians?
Yeah, I think Penny, there's, as we all know, there's no silver bullets in this space. The issues are complex and challenging and entrenched and often intergenerational. That said, I think there is a key to unlocking better outcomes for all Australians and all Australian children, and that key is focusing and targeting on inequality at the front end of our thinking. We need a holistic and connected plan for children in Australia. We continue to see the siloing of efforts around improving children's wellbeing. You know, we have a strong stream of work in the child protection lane. We've got our educational investment, we've got our health stream, but I still think we're struggling to integrate and put children's lived experience strongly at the centre of our response. We've got opportunities through work government is investing in around the Measuring What Matters initiative, for example. We're anticipating the release shortly of the National Early Years Strategy. It's absolutely essential that this work places a commitment to reducing inequality front and centre as a core objective. And it needs to ensure that all of its initiatives are built around measurable and interconnected, multidimensional domains of children's wellbeing. So I'd say, Penny, just to summarise that, we've got to target the drivers of inequity. We have to recognise the importance of culture and identity to health and wellbeing outcomes. We have to put children in the centre of our policy thinking and ensure that when the circumstances of the adults around children change, that doesn't negatively impact on children's outcomes and experiences. And critically, we need to get children and young people involved. I'm excited that we've got Emily and Tithi with us here today. You know, some of the lights in some of the very concerning statistics portrayed around young people's mental health. Some of the solutions are really held in what young people are doing when they're involved in designing and interacting with the system, and that absolutely has to continue.
Yeah, Nicole, agree 100%. It is, you know, we are delighted to have some young people and some focus on actually elevating that voice of lived experience. As I read through the things that we've been able to put together in the report and the opportunities that we have to actually take some next steps and to push towards better outcomes for children and young people. And some of the things that you know, really speak to me are those things around the ability to be able to participate in the design of current and future health services and what that looks like when young people are empowered and enabled to be able to step into those roles. The opportunity to create youth-friendly services that are, again, grounded in lived experience, that are run and coordinated by young people themselves. I'm really excited about the opportunities. Another piece of work that ARACY has been involved in the last few months has been a really comprehensive look at vaping and the challenges that vaping presents across all domains of health and wellbeing. And we want to make sure that when we're designing responses to all of these health crises, that we are drawing on those voices of young people, drawing on lived experience, drawing on the wisdom that comes with being young. We hear a lot about the wisdom that comes with age, but actually there's a great amount of wisdom that comes for being young as well. And to that end, and I want to thank you, Nicole, for jumping on today, for launching this report with me, this deep dive into young people's mental health webinar, and to hand over the mic to my colleague from ARACY, Kieran Sampson, who is going to kick us off with actually doing the very thing we've just described, that moment where we step back and we take our powerful voices away and we put that power into the hands of actual young people and let them share their stories and their experience. So Kieran, thank you for facilitating that discussion, and I'm going to hand over to you, and it's really looking forward to what we're going to talk about.
Thank you, Penny and Nicole. Hello, everyone. My name is Kieran Sampson. I'm one of the members of the knowledge translation team here at ARACY. I just want to make a note that the report, or a link to the report, is actually should now be in the chat box here if you'd like to check it out. It's a link through to the UNICEF website, so please do. We really want everyone to read the report, of course. It's my pleasure to introduce our next guests, Emily Unity and Tithi Mukherjee, who are joining us for the panel discussion component of this webinar. Emily and Tithi bring to this discussion their experiences and expertise, in particular highlighting the importance of including young people in the planning and delivery of healthcare, as Penny was just mentioning. They are the lived experience that complements the data that we have highlighted in our report. Firstly, to Emily. Emily is an award-winning mental health advocate, software engineer and creative designer. Emily currently holds roles as a board director, consultant, project manager, facilitator and an ambassador. Emily is informed by their intersectional lived and living experiences. This includes mental ill health, disability, LGBTQIA+, multiculturalism, neurodivergence, homelessness, family violence and more. Welcome, Emily. Tithi is the volunteer manager at the leading youth mental health service, Reach Out Australia. She is passionate about mental health advocacy and supporting young people to become the voice of their communities. And she does this by fostering relationships Tithi is driven by a deep passion for uplifting young people in the broader community. Welcome, Tithi, and I believe you've both worked with each other in the past. Thank you both for joining us today and for so generously sharing your time and expertise. So firstly, Tithi, can you please tell us a little bit about Reach Out and the work that Reach Out does?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Tithi and my pronouns are she, her. And as Kieran, you mentioned, I am the volunteer manager at Reach Out. And, you know, it's such an exciting place to work and it's such an exciting role. And it is the role through which I did meet Emily and we have worked together in the past. So Reach Out Australia, basically, we're a digital mental health service. We've been around for 25 years. And the service provides early intervention and a preventative mental health support for young people, for parents and carers of young people, and also for schools. And as my role in the organisation, in Reach Out, young people are really at the heart of everything we do. And as a volunteer manager, I become the bridge between the volunteers and the organisation. And, you know, I just engage with them on a daily basis and ensure that they are their voices are being heard and they're sharing their lived and living experience in the work we do, but also in the community. So yes, that's a little bit about me and the organisation.
Thank you. Emily, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience as a UNICEF ambassador and your other advocacy work?
Thanks so much, everyone, for having me here. And thanks so much, Kieran, for the very kind introduction. I tend to go quite red and embarrassed when people read out my bio. It's like that feeling when people sing you happy birthday and you just kind of sit there. Name's Emily, pronouns are they, them. I'm calling in from Wonderyland today. I'm a lived experience advocate, which essentially means that I basically use my own lived and living experiences of navigating various systems and various inequalities to improve and inform those systems for people that are just like me. And along my advocacy journey, I've been really grateful to try out different types of advocacy, like some of the ones that Kieran has mentioned. But what's sort of consistent across that is I do work from an intersectional lens, and I bring my different perspectives of whether it be a young person or whether it be mental ill health or disability or queerness. I think it's really important that we really raise our voices and speak truth to what our lived expertise really says, rather than the learned expertise, because it is different to live through and navigate something, especially as a young person in this evolving world, versus reading about something from a third-party perspective. And I'm of the very firm belief that I think advocacy is best done with other people, where you're learning with and from other people, because we can each be the experts of our own experience, but we can't be the experts of other people's experiences. And in advocating alongside other organizations, that has included, I'm very privileged to say, it's included Reach Out and UNICEF. And I was very privileged to be a young ambassador for UNICEF last year, and just so grateful to continue my work with UNICEF this year.
That's fantastic. Emily, could you share a little bit about your experiences and those of other young people with mental health services in Australia? What do you think has worked, and where do you see the challenges?
Sure. Growing up, I didn't know that mental health existed, and neither did my parents. I come from a refugee and migrant background where my parents have fled literal wars and lived childhoods that were characterized by things such as starvation and homelessness. And so me growing up very privileged and not having to worry about a roof over my head or food on my plate, I very much was denied the ability to express my emotions, and mental health didn't exist. And I think that that's the childhood that my parents are raised in, and so the trauma that was kind of passed on to me. I had to overcome a lot of individual shame and stigma in order to acknowledge the fact that I needed help and that I had mental health needs. So that sort of internal shame and that preference of self-reliance was something that took a lot of unlearning, and as well as navigating the community stigma that was around me and the perceived stigmatizing attitudes towards help seeking. But eventually, when I did get into the mental health system, it was at a point of crisis. It was someone else that picked up something and very much put me in touch with someone that was involved in the mental health system. I started navigating it from there. And to this day, I still find it to be one of the most accessible systems from many lenses. Firstly, there's a lack of awareness and understanding of the systems and supports. It takes a very high level of literacy to be able to access those supports, literacy from a number of angles, not just English literacy. English is my native language, but also like mental health literacy specific within the Australian context as well. There's also significant barriers regarding physical and financial access, whether that be opening hours or locations, or just not being in metro areas, or being not in the East Coast as well. But I think it's especially in terms of inclusion and representation, which is regarding culture or queerness or any level of difference. There are these massive system silos where mental health systems don't talk to each other, or they say that you're too complex. Those sorts of experiences have characterized my experience in navigating various systems. Often, if I am accepted in one place because of my queerness, I won't be accepted because of my culture or XYZ. And I think when I got into advocacy and continuing now, many of my experiences are far from uncommon. And it's not just a lack of intention or that really makes it, because everyone is doing their best in the system, but I think it's also a lack of resourcing, like a lack of system resourcing and workforce shortages. Ultimately, I think the main thing that's missing is that voices like mine, platforms like this, are extremely rare. Lived and living experience is still something that is rarely spoken about outside of these spaces. And that lack of lived and living experience engagement within services for co-production, co-design, and even lived experience workforces like peer workers and leadership, those don't really exist. And addressing those things, embedding our knowledge and having us actually be part of the systems and create better systems, I think that's the ultimate change that will change the way that we do things and create systems and services that are informed by our lived expertise and correct the harm that we've experienced.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully we've got some people that are listening and watching today that are in a position to make some of those changes. So well done. Thank you for raising those issues. Tiffy, could you tell us a little bit about how different models of peer support work and what a peer worker is?
I can share a little bit about it. As a youth worker, I have worked with a lot of young people who think peer support is very, very important. And Reach Out as a service, we do have the online communities and our peer chat service where we have, young people providing peer support to other young people out there, and both being anonymous services, they are very, very highly accessible. I think the importance that I've seen in the organisation with peer workers is just it brings a value of embedding lived experience. It really ensures that we're fostering a culture where that values lived experience, and that translates to young people who access these services feeling less alone. As a digital mental health service that's accessible through, just having internet access, just being able to go online and speak to someone who may have a similar lived experience to you is a very, it's a very interesting experience because you get to feel that you're not alone. Em, did you want to add anything to that in terms of peer work models?
Yeah, sure. As you probably both know, I can go on about this forever. But I'd say that I've been a peer worker previously and still do a little bit today. And the reason why I was drawn to that work is because in my personal recovery journey, I tried so many things, whether it be medication or therapies and all sorts of things. And they had helped to an extent, but I think one of the game-changing catalyst factors in my journey was meeting someone that genuinely understood what I was going through because they had lived it. And I think there's such a big difference between saying it's okay to not be okay versus demonstrating and role modeling that vulnerability and that recovery. And for me, like when I met someone that had a very similar experience to me or could even talk about their experiences, it felt like permission giving, and it felt like the first time that I was seen and I could learn the language to communicate my experiences. I really can't tell you how much it's helped. So that was my motivation for being a peer worker. It's still my motivation for doing all the other work that I do now. one of the highlights of my peer work career was in a multidisciplinary setting where we were trying to pilot this like no wrong door approach. So we were seeing young people from a variety of different backgrounds, regardless of their presentation. And I was in a team with psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, access clinicians, and then there was little old me that wasn't working from a clinical lens, just from a peer worker lens. And it was a consistent narrative that, you know, the people that I saw, sometimes we would have something in common, whether that be a mental ill health problem or whether that be a hobby or some favorite cafe or something. But I think the level of being able to see someone that looks vaguely like you, that is in remotely the same age range as you, and they know that you've experienced the same sort of world as you, there is more trust and comfort and safety immediately. And you don't have to do nearly as much work to rapport building. And being able to have that reciprocal relationship as opposed to a one-way relationship where there is a helper and a helpee, it really does change things for so many people. You'll also be able to like provide that kind of living proof that things can and do get better, that it is possible to live with this. And I think that that's something that I needed growing up, and that I've been so privileged to provide that to other people. As for like how that's been feedback from young people, I'm definitely not just like projecting onto them my experience. I very much listen to them and try to adapt to like what they say is working for them and what isn't. And the feedback has been that like it's a lot more trustworthy. They often tell me things that they don't tell their clinicians, and they know that like because we work in a multidisciplinary team, we can work together, but they're more comfortable disclosing it to me and more comfortable with me being the advocate for them. But all that being said, I'd say that peer work is still one of the undersupported and undersung heroes of the mental health system at the moment. It's still incredibly rare. And for organizations that do employ peer workers or do try to employ peer workers, there's so many barriers for them to implementing a whole new model where you are not just introducing a new discipline. It's not like, we're just introducing occupational therapists. It's a whole new discipline that also requires a lot of like power change and culture change, like Tithi said. Especially if you are used to that like helper, helpee, clinician, like service user relationship. So many people are not used to talking about someone like they're your client, and then suddenly they're your colleague and your equal, and they get paid the same as you, and they work at the same office. It's very strange for them, I would assume, and it gets even stranger when it gets up to levels such as like you're in committees and advisory committees and then boards with people, and you're in this identified lived experience position. It can be extremely comfortable for people who have held that power for so long and been the sole power holder to be able to realize, oh my gosh, this person has equal power as me. I think that that's one of the biggest things that has been a really big barrier for organizations, is that, yeah, there's a lot of good intention, but there's a lot of lack of preparedness for all those sorts of individual humanistic things that need to change as well. Oop, Kieran, I just think you're muted, sorry. Oh no.
Emily and Tithia, can you hear me? It's Penny.
Yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. While we're trying to figure out what's happening with Kieran's sound, thank you for sharing those experiences, Emily. It's so helpful and grounding to be able to hear that in your words and in your perspective. One of the things I particularly note is that this was something that you weren't aware of, and until you actually made that connection with your peer worker and then yourself, that you didn't know it was the thing you didn't know you needed until you found it. How do we go about now elevating the importance of that peer support and peer worker role? How do we make sure that that's not the next young person's story as well? How do we help people to think, well, maybe what I need is, or one of the things that I might like to try is, so that they don't find out as late as you did that these roles exist and that they're a chance of being able to be something that's really helpful?
I think it is. Thank you so much for that question. Thank you for reflections as well. I think honestly it is a lack of just complete awareness, and it is a lot on organizations that control a lot of the narrative of communication to raise awareness of peer work and the fact that it's okay to talk about these sorts of stories. I think it's about going beyond those sorts of awareness days where we just talk about mental health and it's okay to seek support, but actually talk about what support is available, how do you access it, is peer work even an option? I think that, you know, peer work isn't, it's not an option until you actually have been connected with someone. I didn't think that it was a career pathway. It's still like, you know, peer work jobs exist, but there is a lack of training and support around it. There's a lack of funding around it for organizations to actually implement that. The career pathway is near non-existent. You become a peer worker and then you become a senior peer worker and then maybe a supervisor and then question mark. I think that like there's a lot of things that need to change systemically as well for it to be a viable supportive pathway for people in the system as well as peer workers, potential peer workers. But I think there are also many ways that we can go about it that don't need to necessarily term it as peer work. I think that that's something that's really interesting is that, you know, mental health is only spoken about, like we call it mental health here in Australia, but I think there are many different ways of expressing well-being and health and just life meaning for many people. And I've seen many cultural approaches that are so wonderful. I won't speak to Aboriginal social emotional well-being, but there are many models there that have already been spoken about, and I'll point to Pat Dudgeon's work as well. But I think that like one of the models that I've really loved that I feel like is so synonymous with what we try to term as peer work now is a model in Zimbabwe that's called the friendship bench. And it's just a little bench where they come and have someone in the community just come and sit with them and just talk about life. And sometimes it's a community elder, so it doesn't need to be a part of the same age group or related to anything. It just needs to be someone that they can see is safe, and it's that dedicated space for them to unpack and learn with each other and explore things together. And I think those sorts of spaces outside of services where we're doing community healing and where we're creating more resilient places, not just within services, that's something that's so invaluable, because I don't want someone to have to fight to get bad enough to just end up in a system in order to find out that this exists.
Thanks, Emily. That's fabulous. It makes me reflect. I know certainly my kids' primary school actually had a friendship bench. That was a lovely way of being able to live that. When you hear Emily's reflections, Tiffy, on that, as somebody who works in a service, what does that mean for you?
I think what Em said was really, really true in terms of just, you know, it doesn't always have to be someone your age. It's just having someone to talk to who may or may not have a similar experience to you and can hear you out and give you a sense of you're not alone. And it's so true when it comes to like awareness, because I think somewhere similar to Emily, I grew up in a society where I wasn't aware of mental health as a thing as well. And it was only in the last 4 years that I figured out that I can work in the mental health industry. So I'm not a stranger to the concept of what your eye doesn't see, the brain doesn't know. And I think peer service, peer work is so important in that case, because even if you may not know what services are out there, if you know how to encourage your friend to seek help, I think that's the most important. Like for me, I think that is something I really, really encourage the young people I work with is when something is wrong, seek help. If you see a friend who needs help, encourage them to seek help. So it's that encouragement of help-seeking behavior, and whether that is formal help, peer help, whatever that could mean, seek help that's right for you. So I really, as a youth worker, every time I communicate with my volunteers and the young people I work with, you know, one of the last sentences I'll put in the email is, you know, if something's up, please go out and seek help. Let me know if I can be of help. And I think that's one of the easiest ways of raising that awareness. Yeah, no, I really agree with what you said, Emily, and thank you for such a great question, Penny.
Hello, I'm back.
Oh,
Yeah,
you're back.
Yes, sorry about that. My whole computer clapped out in the end. I'm not sure where we're up to. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you, I think you've sort of covered it in a way, is what do you think makes a great youth mental health service? you've talked about online options, and obviously there's the face-to-face options. I do always wonder about, you know, children and young people who live in remote areas, and just you mentioned earlier, Emily, about access issues. It must be so tough for them to find support, and also in a small town. So yeah, for you, what constitutes a good working mental health service, and that, you know, meets the needs of all sorts of people?
Sure. So I think that it's I sent a message across to Tiffy earlier this morning that was like, hey, we can fix the health system if we just invent Baymax from the movie Big Hero 6, and everyone gets individualized support, and everyone gets a little robot that just knows them and can be there for them. I think, you know, that's the way that we can provide all-inclusive support. But if we're creating these services, I don't think that it's a really nice intention to do a no wrong door approach. You know, it's really nice to think that we can accept everyone in and we're going to be address all their needs. But I don't think that that's the reality, is that everyone is just so incredibly different. The best youth mental health services that I have sought help from and that I've worked in have consistently been the ones that practice humility in a way that is really meaningful. And that's the ones that have really shared their power with their young people that they're serving, in whatever community or way that is. So, for example, I'm going to use the example where I live in. So I live in like Metro Melbourne, one of the most privileged places. But I see that there are services that are consistently saying like, oh, okay, we are presented with this person that we actually haven't met before, and we haven't seen this sort of presentation before. We don't have policies around this. How can we actually learn about this? And they go and they seek the knowledge, and they go and they learn and they do better. And because I think that that's something that, you know, we can't just keep putting young people in the too hard box. We can't say like, oh, you know, we don't do queer services, or we don't do queer and cultural services. Like, we need to be able to say, okay, we don't do that. Who can we work with? How can we learn? How can we refer them across to this person and create more collaborative and more seamless experience for the young person? We don't need to have all the answers. I think we need to be consistently looking to how can we gain those answers as well. And a big part of that is really inviting the people who are in the community to create the service with you and reshape it consistently. And this is especially relevant when it comes to children's and youth mental health, because my experience as a young person, I was born in the 90s, is completely different to young people that are being born today. And it will be completely different to young people that are born next year. And I think that that's something that needs to be consistently even more evolving, is the youth space, because it's so exponentially different, whether that be technology or climate change, or economy. I think that the privilege levels change depending on which year that you were born in and which circumstance that you're born in. So we need to invite more power sharing, and more consistent improvement with the people who are actually experiencing the services.
Well, I can certainly speak from my own experience that when I was young, you know, if you saw the school counsellor, it was very hush-hush and no one talked about it and you didn't admit it. And now my daughter's school, it's like they're celebrities, and they all love to hang out with the school counsellors. So it was quite different to my experience when I was at school. A question that I have, first of all, I'd just say to the audience that if you would like to ask a question, you can pop it into the question box in the go-to panel. And while we wait and see if anyone does have any questions, young people have said that they get help mostly through their friends, like that's their primary and their first stop when they're, you know, not feeling good about life. So how do you think we can help young people generally and better equip them to provide that support in an informal way? Tiffy, what do you think? Because you're working with young people and training them up more formally, but if we can't get them all to reach out.
Such a great question. You know, it's such a great question because when I work with young people, as Emily said as an answer to the previous question, one of the approaches I take is personalization, and I really make sure that every young person I'm working with, I know, you know, what their life is, what their situation is, and what kind of opportunities they would really, really bring their skills to. And when I work with them, we always talk about, you know, what's happening in life, you know, how are your friends, how are people around you? And I've noticed a lot of them do end up providing formal, informal peer support to their peers and friends. And one of the things I think I always remind them is identify whether you are in the right time and space to provide help first. I think that is number one. If your friend comes to help for you, to you, which is, you know, what friendship is, it's really, really okay to let them know that, hey, I hear you, but I may not be the right person. I may not be able to, I may not have the equipped or the tools to provide you the support, but I'll come along with you. I'll sit down and Google it with you. I'll go to the place with you. So that's one of the first things I always remind people and the young people I work with is, if you are in the right space and headspace to provide help, fabulous, go for it. But if you are not, identify that and acknowledge that. And I think this is when I've also noticed nowadays, you know, in the digital world, like one of the first places people go for help is Google. Like, you know, this is happening. And I say, if, in a lot of cultural backgrounds, it becomes hard for the young person or for the friends to, first of all, acknowledge what they're going through, and then to really talk about it virtually, like in person. And that's when I say a really, really good place is to go to online spaces or anonymous services, where you can share your lived experience and ask for help, but not disclose too much information about you. But yeah, like those are the two things that I always say, is encourage others to take help and identify if you are in the right place to provide help. Em, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I definitely agree with so many of the things that you said. I think that, yeah, like on one aspect of it, there's like, you know, telling people, giving young people the literacy and the awareness to be able to hold conversations and set boundaries and connect them to other supports when they don't have that space or that awareness. But I think that comes from a very systemic lens of like, we need to educate kids about those sorts of like soft skills in school and educate families and carers, supporters and communities. And we also need to continue that sort of education through mentoring and informal peer support opportunities. I think it takes a whole community and system approach to make sure that we are all aware of what's happening. And it doesn't take a luck or based or even like a postcode lottery for people to be able to be aware of these sorts of things. But I think also something that would really help is addressing the disempowerment that a lot of young people feel, because it's no news to anyone that the mental health systems, whatever state that you're in, are broken and generally don't help as many people as they intend to. And I think that being able to create more space for co-design and co-production and power sharing and highlighting really great examples of that, encouraging other young people to step in and be respected as experts of their own experience, I think that level of agency and power and meaning that I've been privileged to experience is not something that I think many young people experience. We need to support young people, make awareness of their ability to create new supports, but we need to do that through awareness and power sharing. And I think that that's one of the things that can really change the feeling of disempowerment and feeling like, what's the point in seeking help from a broken system, rather than like, hey, I don't like the system. How can I change it? Like, here's an opportunity for me to do that. It's that sense of agency and change is something that's denied to many young people generally in every generation. But I think it's something that we have an opportunity to change now.
Excellent. And we've talked about online and face-to-face, and someone has made a comment saying that it's, you know, that many young people, as you've just said, are more comfortable doing it anonymously or having a little bit of distance, like it's a bit much or a bit too heavy to be looking someone in the face. How do we reach young people online? A reach out paying for advertising, or, you know, how can we get in front of people online? Is it PR? Is it media? Like, how do we get to people online? TikTok?
I mean, yes, obviously we do have a marketing team in the organization, but putting that aside, I think with a lot of the young people that I have worked with, they've obviously, most of them have heard of Reach Out as a service because we also have a service for schools. So school teachers and school counselors can actually access our service. We are also 100% digital service. So if you Google anything to do with lived mental health experiences, we do pop up in the search. And all you need, I think, for Reach Out is just internet. And that could be a phone or a laptop, wherever you are. I think one of the things that I've realized, or I've heard a lot from the young people I've worked with, especially those from rural and regional backgrounds, from those who live in, you know, different parts of the country that maybe have like 100 kilometers away, that's their first, you know, psychologist or psychiatrist who's available. I've heard that digital services is kind of paving the way right now, because as a digital service, you can do it on your own time when you really need it. For a lot of young people going through a mental illness or experiencing a triggering moment is in the night, you know, is at a time of day when maybe physical services are not accessible, and the only service that's accessible is an emergency room. Which could also be triggering to many people. So digital services like Reach Out and the other digital mental health services out there, we're actually providing a space where young people can go and read something on their own. And also addressing the thing that you said, that not everyone is ready to speak. Not everyone is ready to go talk to someone face to face. A service like Reach Out, where we provide information in content form, or in video form, or in, you know, online communities when other people are writing their lived experience. For a lot of young people, just reading is like the first step of, oh wow, I'm going through these. Oh, these symptoms. You know, it's that first step of acceptance of, I do need help. And then when you go into things like peer work and you go into our online communities and seek that support, that anonymous peer support, it's you know, it's like baby steps into the mental health world. And being able to provide that in language that young people want, in language that young people want to read, you know, in a TikTok form or in an Instagram Reels form, being able to do those things and getting these ideas from young people right off the bat. My volunteers participate in projects across the organization and every team. So having that youth involvement and having their ideas, you know, is, I think, what is really helping us be a service that is for young people. And the sentence that we use is, young people are on the journey with us in helping us build a service. So we really want to hear from them.
That's fantastic. Well, we are pretty close to time, and I just wondered if either of you wanted to just say any final words about what we've talked about today. As I mentioned earlier, we might have some people viewing this that are in a position to make some change. So over to you.
Do you want to go first, Tiffany?
I was just going to say, do you want to go first?
My brain is marinating if you have something to say.
Okay, happy to. I think for all the young people and, you know, everyone who's attending this webinar, I really, really want to say is, you know, I think accessibility to services, all kinds of services, physical, emotional, mental, is very important. And so if you know of services that people around you may not know, please encourage them to seek help and provide help with them. And of course, if any of the services are hard to access, if you're in the mental health space, Reach Out is an anonymous and digitally easily accessible service. So feel free to check that out. And yeah, just hope you can include youth in the work that you do. As a youth worker, it's been very fulfilling and inspiring to work with young people. So I highly recommend that.
Emily, did something come to mind?
Sure. I'd say that like many of the things that I've spoken about today have been very systemic, and they're probably very relevant to people who are in the executive or on boards of various organizations. But if you're joining today and you are not one of those people, I do want to leave you with a similar message, but make it a bit more explicit, of that humility and that inviting people in and creating those safe spaces and showing them that they have power and value in their voice is something that you can do as an individual, regardless of where you work or who you are or wherever you're from. And it doesn't need to be with young people, but young people do need that a lot right now. And I can just say that like those sorts of massive systemic changes, definitely they help a lot when they come from the top, but they're driven by us folks at the bottom, and then they need us to stay annoying and stay disruptive. And we need to consistently advocate for people to have a voice and change the ways that things are working, because they're not working right now. So I do want to just say that like, if you feel disempowered at all because you are not a CEO or a board chair, I think that it's important that you also see the value in your own voice and see the value in your own humility, and that you can provide that safe space for someone else. It really does take only one person to change things.
Sure does. Thank you so much to both of you. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. The recording of today's session will be available in early next week on the ARACY website if people would like to have a look for it and share it with others. We also have in the chat box at the moment a link to, if you'd like to subscribe to the ARACY newsletter and hear about further webinars that we have coming up. So thank you again to both of you and to Nicole and Penny, our earlier guests, and we'll close things off for today. Thanks a lot, Emily and Tiffy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much.
I do want to